She accidentally caught her boss bullying an employee, and at that moment, the files in her hands slipped and fell to the floor. Hearing the noise, the boss snapped back to his senses, and she hurriedly gathered the papers before turning around and leaving. Back at her station, Maud tried her best to forget everything that had just happened, but the shameless boss came right up to her and said one line,
"Somiglia a te a quell'età."
Disgusting, vile, and completely without limits. Maud could not say anything, and could only continue with the work in her hands while suppressing the anger burning inside her. The girl who had been humiliated wanted to wash away the filth on her body, but she could only endure it in silence, because she had to hold on to this poorly paid and hard-won job. It made Maud think of herself at the age of 12, and she knew she had to do something, so that women could be seen and respected. After watching this true story, you will surely be filled with deep admiration for the unyielding strength of women. The story takes place in London in 1912, when a woman's wages had to be handed over to her husband, and even custody of children belonged to men. At that time, people believed that women lacked the calm temperament and balanced judgment needed for public life, so women were not allowed to take part in politics, and they did not even have the right to vote. Some even claimed that allowing women into politics would mean the failure of the social order. Women were also defined as possessions attached to men, and the male members of their families could make any decision on their behalf. The heroine of the story, Maud, works in a laundry factory. Most of the workers there are women, while the few jobs held by men are much easier, yet their pay is far higher than that of the women. For decades, some awakened women there had united and kept demanding their rights in a peaceful way, but they received almost no response. Until the early 20s, they were left with no choice but to begin using more radical methods. They demanded equality with men, and they demanded the right for women to vote. Maud discovered that one of the women in the laundry factory was also involved in it, and she quickly hid inside a bus. At that moment, she still did not understand what the meaning of all this was. Compared with the men in other households, Maud's husband was somewhat better. He cared about his wife's injuries, and thoughtfully treated her wounds for her. That day at work, the female worker who had joined the movement arrived late. When Maud saw the boss deliberately making things difficult for her, kind-hearted Maud stepped in to help her.
La cinghia si è di nuovo allentata.
L'hanno controllata venerdì, Maud.
C'è puzza di bruciato. Le ricontrollerei tutte.
Violet seized the chance to slip away as well. She hoped that Maud could also join their organization, whose base was at Edith and her son's pharmacy on the street. After work, Maud saw the wife of a member of parliament giving a speech. She announced that a women's hearing would soon be held, and she hoped the female workers would rise together to fight for equal treatment with men, including the right to vote and equality in working conditions. She wanted to choose one representative from the laundry factory to go with her to the House of Commons and give testimony. Some women were willing to accept the situation as it was, but there were still others ready to join the fight, and this hearing was a major turning point for the women's suffrage movement. Someone asked Maud whether she would go and give testimony. In Maud's eyes, the boss was not that bad, but for Violet, she wanted to fight for women, and even more, she wanted to fight for her daughter, who had been following her into the laundry factory to work since the age of 12.
Va fatta qualsiasi cosa serva, in qualsiasi modo.
Come distruggere le vetrine? Non è rispettoso.
Al diavolo il rispetto. Vuoi che io rispetti la legge? E io voglio una legge che rispetti me.
Those words left a slight impact on Maud. Maud mentioned the MP's wife to her husband, but he said dismissively that woman had started shouting again. Her husband might have been decent, but his fixed ideas about women were still deeply rooted in his simple mind. The next day, Maud brought her son to that pharmacy. The woman who owned the shop there was also a suffragette. And that day, another woman who had taken part in smashing windows also came there, and an inexplicable fire began to burn inside Maud's heart. However, after she walked out the door, someone secretly took her picture. It turned out that the police were closely watching this safe house, and they were recording the women who frequently came and went. But no one could have imagined that this new face, captured by accident, would become someone they could do nothing about. It was not until the incident in the office, after enduring the coercive abuse at the beginning, that the peaceful life Maud had held onto for so many years was finally shaken loose. That afternoon, Violet left work early. She had been chosen by the MP's wife to give testimony, and when Maud saw the boss making things difficult for her again, she deliberately raised her voice to support Violet.
Violet, verrò io con te domani, quando parlerai.
Her husband asked worriedly what she was planning to do. Not wanting to disappoint him, Maud forced out a faint smile and said that she was only going there to listen. However, The very next day, Violet showed up covered in injuries, and the MP's wife was stunned when she saw her like that. It was obvious that she could not possibly attend the hearing in this condition. Violet gave the opportunity to Maud, and now that things had come to this, she had no choice but to step in. With absolutely no preparation, Maud sat in the center of the hearing room, and the men present made her feel intensely pressured. She set Violet's written speech aside, and at the Prime Minister's request, she began telling her own story. Her mother had been working in that laundry factory since the age of 14, and even right after giving birth, the boss had called her back to work. When Maud was still a baby, she was placed inside a copper dye vat, and every woman who brought a child to work did the same. Maud knew nothing about her father, and when she was 4 years old, her mother was scalded to death by an overturned dye vat. At 7, she began working part-time in the laundry factory, and by 12, she had dropped out of school and started working full-time. With her skillful hands, she became a team leader at 17, a forewoman at 20, and remained there all the way until now. The Prime Minister praised her for being young and accomplished, but she said, "If you are a woman, this kind of laundry work is not something you can do for long."
E questo perché?
Vengono i dolori e anche la tosse, dita schiacciate, ulcere alle gambe, ustioni, mal di testa per i vapori. Lo scorso anno una è rimasta avvelenata, non può lavorare, polmoni rovinati.
E la vostra paga?
Ci danno 13 scellini a settimana, signore. Agli uomini invece 10, ma il nostro orario è un terzo più lungo.
Per voi il voto che significherebbe, signora Watts?
Non ho mai creduto di ottenerlo, non ho pensato a cosa significherebbe.
Allora perché siete qui?
L'idea è che potremmo, che questa vita, che c'è un altro modo di vivere questa vita.
The Prime Minister was deeply impressed by what Maud had described, and he promised to give her a reply as soon as possible. The coming amendment to the bill might perhaps bring about a change in voting rights. Maud was very happy about everything that had happened that day. Although her husband did not support her, he did not oppose her either, and what worried her more was that others might treat her the way they had treated Violet. The female owner of Edith's pharmacy invited her over as a guest. The news that Maud had persuaded the Prime Minister had already spread throughout the entire circle, and everything their generation was doing was for the sake of the next one. The shop owner had once dreamed of becoming a doctor, but her father had refused to allow it. She believed that one day, the name of this pharmacy would be changed to Edith and Daughters. From that day on, Maud became full of confidence, and the smile on her face seemed to shine with sunlight. Her husband's attitude remained the same as before. He did not support Maud getting too close to them, but he did not object to her being with Violet. Today was the day the Prime Minister would announce the result. Yet to the disappointment of all the suffragists, the men sympathized with women's suffering, but women still did not win the right to vote. Maud felt that she had been deceived. Everything recorded at that hearing had become proof of their hypocrisy, and this was also the first time she shouted the word liar. After the Prime Minister left, the security forces began to move. One emotional woman was beaten, and when Maud told them to stop, she also placed herself in danger, as one woman after another fell beside her while fighting for her own rights. Maud's entire view of the world collapsed with them. In the end, 6 women were arrested. The MP's wife was bailed out by her husband, while she wanted to use her own money to bail everyone out. But the husband who controlled the family finances never agreed. The newly arrived inspector was very forceful, and he also understood clearly that what they had done was not some thoughtless impulse, but he was only an enforcer of the law, and could only do what he was supposed to do. And the law told Maud that she would have to stay here for 7 days.
Ci hanno mentito.
Non hanno mentito. Niente hanno promesso, niente hanno dato.
The one suffering was not only Maud, but also her husband Sonny. The men at work told him to keep his wife under control, and the ugly insults that were too harsh to repeat, along with the pointing and whispering of the neighbors, left him unable to eat or sleep. 7 days later, they were finally released. Everyone else had someone there to meet them, but Maud was alone. A fellow member gave her a medal, the honor awarded for being imprisoned for the first time, but what she cared about more was the child at home. Maud hurried to her doorstep, and her husband pulled her into the house at once. During those 7 days, he did not know how he had managed to endure it, and Maud promised there would not be a next time, and returning to her family made her feel deeply at peace. In a firm tone, Sonny told their son to go back to sleep. Maud had only just returned, yet she still had to make tea for her husband, and she crouched humbly in front of him to show her apology, but Sonny said,
Non mi umilierai un'altra volta.
Maud returned to her job, and the boss looked smug. he had already found someone to replace her, and that person was Violet's daughter. After work, Violet stopped Maud and told her that there would be a meeting on Friday, where the spiritual leader they followed would give a speech. Maud said nothing, and simply turned around and walked away. Yet that night, as she looked at the story of that leader's life, her restless heart began to waver once again. On Friday morning, she asked Sunny a question: if they had a daughter, what would her future life be like? And Sunny only said coldly,
Quella che hai tu.
and it was at that very moment that Maud made up her mind. At the same time, the police received word from an undercover source that the spiritual leader of the suffragists was going to make a speech, and would deliver a hard response to everything that had happened recently. This fugitive leader was a thorn in their side. That night, Maud met up with Violet and attended the leader's speech. She knew clearly what consequences this appearance would bring, but the king's disregard and mistreatment of them made her realize that it was time to make sacrifices and take action. The purpose of this was to fight for an era in which every girl born into the world could one day enjoy the same opportunities as her brothers.
Non sottovalutate mai il potere che abbiamo noi donne di essere artefici del nostro destino. Noi non vogliamo violare la legge. Noi vogliamo fare la legge.
The leader's words inspired everyone once again. The people from the police station had already arrived, and the leader immediately turned back to prepare to leave, while the women blocked the doorway and refused to let them enter. But the strong guards still broke through easily and shoved the leader hard to the ground. But they underestimated the wisdom of women. With one clever switch, using a fake to fool the real thing, the true leader had already boarded the prepared car through the back door. By the time the guards arrived, she was long gone. Maud and the others were arrested again, but this time, the inspector did not lock them up. Instead, he sent them to their doorsteps and let public opinion punish them. As the head of the household, Sunny had completely lost face. This time he no longer forgave Maud, and chose to throw her out of the house.
Sonny, che cosa fai? Sonny, Sonny, adesso.
With Violet's help, Maud moved into an apartment, and the Women's Suffrage Union would temporarily pay her rent. Having lost her family, Maud broke down in tears. As someone who had already been through it, Violet comforted her by saying that her strength would only make those men even angrier. This was a necessary sacrifice in the fight for rights, and what was being lost now was for a better future. Meanwhile, at the police station, the inspector also struck back. They published the information of all the followers, and the photos printed in the newspapers had been carefully selected to make them look ugly and vicious. Maud became a disgrace in the eyes of women, and everyone kept their distance from her, while the boss directly told her to leave. But she believed that after so many years of asking for nothing in return, she should have received something in return, and what Maud gave him was a counterattack he would never forget for the rest of his life. Maud did not run away, and instead sat there waiting for the police to come. The inspector arrived at once, but this time he acted completely out of character. He said he could let the matter go, but Maud would have to go undercover and report everything about the union to him. He wanted to turn Maud into an informant. Maud wanted to expose the boss's abuse, but he told her that no one would ever believe a woman like her. In his eyes, Maud was nothing more than cannon fodder for the Women's Suffrage Union, and now the inspector was the only lifeline she had left. Looking at the photograph of her son, Maud's heart began to waver. At the latest meeting, they gathered at a church, which had become their new base. Following the movement leader's newest instructions, they planned to cut the telegraph wires and destroy the mailboxes. Everyone was given an important set of coordinates and addresses, and whether Maud would betray them was still unknown. The next day, she secretly called her son over and spent a joyful afternoon with him. At dusk, she reluctantly brought her son back, and she told Sunny that he was her child. But Sunny's response was,
Qual è il suo posto? Lo decido io. La legge dice questo.
After returning to the apartment, Maud took off her wedding ring, and from that moment on, she became a true suffragette. Every night, no matter the wind or rain, she stood outside the window trying to make her son laugh, only to be cruelly blocked by Sunny.
Se la legge dice che non posso vedere mio figlio, lotterò per cambiare la legge. Siamo soldati di fanteria.
Then their operation began. In the early hours of the morning, mailboxes across London were blown apart, and the wireless lines were cut. Unfortunately, one of the members was photographed, and the undercover source reported that this woman was at Edith's pharmacy. The inspector immediately rushed there with his man and took the woman away. That woman was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Violet began to lose her nerve. She could accept a week or two, but 6 months was simply too long. For the next plan, They were going to make a major statement using the Prime Minister's newly built villa. The MP's wife revealed that the villa was still unfinished, which made this the perfect time to act. Who could have imagined that Violet would refuse to take part in the next operation, even though it had come directly from the movement leader? Maud ran after her and hoped she would not quit, but Violet had a painful reason she could not speak openly about. If anything went wrong, her child might be born in prison, and so, the only ones left on the front line were Maud and the female owner of the pharmacy. On her son's birthday, Maud hoped Sonny would let her see him, but he acted evasive, as if he were hiding something. Maud rushed into the house and found a strange husband and wife there. Only then did she realize that the weak and helpless Sonny could not take care of their son, so he had handed the boy over for adoption. The matter was already settled, and all Maud could do was ask her son to remember her name, so that when he grew up, he could come and find her. Then Sonny coldly snatched the boy away, and let the wealthy couple take the child from her.
Che cosa hai fatto?
Maud, è la cosa migliore.
Che cosa hai fatto?
Calma!
Che cosa
Basta,
hai
è la
fatto?
cosa migliore!
Che cosa hai fatto? Che
Maud!
cosa hai fatto?
Maud!
Che cosa hai fatto?
Maud was drowning in the pain of losing her son, while only the pharmacy owner was still making explosives. Her husband, who had always supported her without conditions, hoped she could calm down. Not only did Violet question the plan ahead, even the movement leader's 2 daughters were against it. But now the arrow was already on the string, and moving forward was the only path left. On the day of the mission, only 3 women took part. The pharmacy owner's husband escorted them to the villa. The 3 women lit the fuse, and then fled at once. The bomb destroyed the Prime Minister's unfinished villa, and before dawn broke, they slipped away into the darkness without a sound. But it did not take long for them to be arrested. The news outside exploded everywhere, and the women's movement leader declared that she was willing to take full responsibility for the bombing and accept imprisonment, and the real perpetrators would be released. Public interest in the case kept growing, and they could no longer allow the situation to spiral further out of control. Because there was no evidence, Maud could only be charged with unlawful assembly. The inspector told her that a maid at the villa had almost been killed in the explosion, and fortunately, she had arrived 2 minutes late. He accused Maud of having no right to gamble with someone else's life. But Maud stared back at him in fury and demanded to know what right he had to stand by and watch women being beaten. While doing nothing, Maud was to be imprisoned for 7 days, and in order to force the government to recognize them as political offenders, she began a hunger strike, because if they were recognized as political prisoners, then the government would be forced to admit that their resistance was political in nature, and not merely the result of women being dismissed as irrational. After 5 days of hunger striking, the prison authorities finally took action. They were going to force-feed them, to prevent them from dying in prison, creating even greater backlash and stirring the suffrage movement into a stronger wave of anger. And so Maud was pinned down by several people, and a tube was forced into her nose. This made the inspector grow quiet and withdrawn. He believed these women should not have been treated this way, but now this was all they were willing to do. After 7 days, the 3 women were released. Maud came alone to the church, and with nowhere left to go, she could only sleep there for the night. At that moment, Violet came and brought her some food. She told Maud to be careful from now on. If she were arrested again, the sentence would start at 2 years. The next day, Maud came to the Women's Suffrage Union. After living through a raid, everyone could feel the pressure closing in, and the movement leader could not afford to be imprisoned again, and the old way of creating headlines could no longer be used, because the government had ordered the press to stay silent. Now, they had to find a way to make the king pardon the movement leader, but in order to get that pardon, they first had to find the one moment that would force the king to make that decision. They suddenly realized that on Wednesday, the king would attend a horse race at the Derby in Britain, and reporters from all over the world would gather there. This was the perfect opportunity. During the king's appearance, they would raise the banner of women's suffrage. At this critical moment, the inspector received Maud's latest whereabouts. He came to the church, and there he discovered their plan. On Wednesday, Maud and another fellow activist slipped into the racecourse. The pharmacy owner, however, was deliberately locked inside the shop by her husband, because her heart was already too weak to endure anymore. At the racecourse, Maud had already found the cameras, and she was preparing to take out the banner and show it to the whole world, but she was stopped at the entrance. They needed a green badge to get in, so Maud had no choice but to give up and search for another chance. The inspector also arrived at the scene and began searching for them in the crowd. The race officially began, and her companion spotted the reporters in the distance. Then, with unwavering resolve, she walked straight toward them. Maud followed close behind, and only when they were near the reporters did the woman turn back and say to Maud, "Never surrender, and never stop fighting." Then she walked onto the track with the banner in her hand, trying to unfold it in front of the cameras. Emily gave her life, and the banner was picked up and hidden away. At last, they were seen by the king, and with her life, she created a headline that shook the world. Back in London, Maud looked at the children playing in the street, and suddenly she thought of something. Then she ran back to the laundry factory like a woman possessed, and pulled Violet's daughter out of there. She knocked on the door of the MP's wife and introduced Violet's daughter to her as a maid. Then she turned and left with calm determination. She saved the fate of a young girl, just as if she had saved her own 12-year-old self. Not long after, the pharmacy owner brought over a newspaper. Emily's death had been reported all over the world, drawing countless people's attention to the fight for women's rights, and thousands attended Emily's funeral. The flame was passed on, and women would inherit her spirit, standing firm in this war without smoke, and never ceasing in their fight for equality. And with that, the whole story comes to an end. It was not until 1918 that women over the age of 30 gained the right to vote. In 1925, the law recognized a mother's right to custody of her children. In 1928, women gained the same voting rights as men. By the time the film was released, the status of women's suffrage in other countries was as follows. The earliest was New Zealand in 1893, China in 1949, and the most recent was Saudi Arabia in 2015. The position women hold in society today was won through the blood and determination of countless pioneers who fought against prejudice. Without question, modern women stand on the shoulders of countless trailblazers, and International Women's Day on March 8th is a recognition of women's achievements. Because of differences in physical makeup and psychological development, men are often seen as more rational, while women are often seen as more emotional. And this is why women were once defined as lacking calmness and balanced judgment. Emotion and reason are not absolutely good or bad. Reason can keep things running steadily, but without emotion, society would also lose its warmth and humanity. Women's rights are not about gender conflict, nor are they about enjoying special treatment. They are about pursuing equal responsibility, equal obligation, and fighting for every equal right within society. The saying that women should only support their husbands and raise children is just like saying that all men are ruled by desire. Both are deeply ironic forms of prejudice, and a man's attitude toward women often reveals his character and the limits of his morality. As society develops, prejudice may seem less visible, but it still exists in this world, and it continues to appear again and again. As long as prejudice exists, this war without smoke will never truly end.